Greetings, greenhouse people. We are back at it with another episode of Tech on Demand, brought to you by the fine folks at Grower Talks magazine. If you don't get Grower Talks and Green Profit every month, head over to growertalks.com and subscribe. Published the magazine for more than 75 years, so it's really about time you start to get the magazine. And speaking of subscribing, be sure to subscribe to the Tech on Demand podcast on your favorite app. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and most of the other major apps. And if you have an extra minute to leave a positive review, that would be great. Every little bit helps our algorithms and allows us to reach more greenhouse and garden center professionals. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and today I'm joined by a good friend and someone who most of you in the garden center and greenhouse industries probably know. It's Clint Albin, and I've known Clint for, it's got to be 20 years, and he's a guy who's always on the leading edge of new trends and developments. So it really wasn't a surprise to me when we caught up at Cultivate in July, and he was all psyched up on AI and its applications for garden center retailers, greenhouse growers, and landscapers, really. And it wasn't just because it's 2025 and every conversation we have these days seems to center on AI. It's actually because he's been working on projects specifically related to artificial intelligence and has seen firsthand how it can empower businesses of all shapes and sizes. In fact, Clint wrote an article for the September issue of Green Profit that sort of inspired this episode, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, but that's enough out of me. That intro is long enough. We have a lot to cover, don't we, Clint?
We do, Bill, and it's great to be here with you. And I'll tell you, it is crazy on how long that we've known one another. And one of the things that I was telling someone the other day is that, there's a group of people that we've all known one another for the same amount of time. Mm-hmm. And we all look like we did look when we first met. We haven't changed. Yet to other people who sort of see us from outside the industry, they're like, oh my gosh, who are those old people? But it is great to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And it's funny, when we were talking before this episode, you mentioned the ANLA management clinics from back in the day, and those were brainstorming sessions. It was like a think tank of industry folks, and some folks listening might go back to those days, and we were probably just children back then. That was a while ago. How's it going, Clint? What are you working on these days?
So I'll tell you, it's going great, but just to sort of link back to the management clinic, and as we're sort of like talking about, AI and what could be done today. In the mid-'70s, when the National Association, decided to have an annual education meeting, they were trying to decide where it should be located. So the board of directors directed the staff to get a large map of the U.S., and they were supposed to put pins in the map for every address of the membership.
Okay.
And so staff put pins in this map, and then they drew a circle around 80% of where the membership was. And then right in the middle of that was Louisville, Kentucky.
Interesting.
And it took weeks to actually sort of put this thing together to decide that Louisville was supposed to be the place. So, here in AI today, you'd be able to sort of get that, answer, in minutes. But it is fun and looking at AI. Bill, I've spent, the last several years in really looking at the business format, because I think one of the things that's sort of happening right now, ever since the pandemic, right, nothing has been the same.
Right.
We aren't able to sort of use the same metrics anymore. And so we're sort of at this place of confluence where, do we have a lag in sort of the way that consumers are actually utilizing the product based on the way the pandemic sort of affected it, right? It was up and then it was down. So is that a part of the laggard that's sort of doing it? But I'm looking at the business format and how we can actually change to increase the number of consumer journeys that consumers take to a garden center every day. So that's what I've been working on.
That's interesting, because it is that journey and the number of visits that's going to drive growth. We listen to some of the state of the industry numbers, and although greenhouses and garden centers seem to be doing pretty well. And certainly compared to pre-pandemic levels, there are some of those metrics that don't look good. And I think that when you think about increasing customer count, customer traffic, and interactions and engagement, whether it's in person or online, that's really where there are some huge opportunities.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think the other part in context with that is we do have to use as a reference point in the year 2025 the article that was in the Wall Street Journal in April of this year about the size of the garden section of Home Depot. And so Home Depot is actually able to do $20 billion with 2,000 locations. And if we look at the IGC version of that, for us to do $20 billion, it takes 15,000 people.
Oh, wow.
So, in one of these things, and so while the mass merchant continues to be one of those people that they're gaining steam, that they continue to look at market share, I think that we need to look at everything that we can do to reverse any trend of a reduction in unit or a reduction in traffic or transaction count.
And that's a perfect segue into our discussion today. And, we could fill tons of time just catching up, but there's a complex topic to address that I know from talking to you, you're able to make much more understandable. So talk a little bit about, we discussed some of the challenges just from a super high level, but when you think about garden centers, greenhouses, landscapers, different segments in our industry, what are some of the challenges they're facing? And I don't want to be doom and gloom. I just want to frame the discussion because the reality is that things are pretty crazy out there, but there are solutions emerging to mitigate some of these kind of sleepless nights that owners and managers in our industry are experiencing. How do you characterize some of the big picture challenges that the different segments of the industry are facing?
So I think everybody sort of faces the same challenge, regardless of business type. And that is, we still remain inside a seasonal business. And the industry for years has tried to figure out from a cash and carry perspective how we either sort of shoulder on the front end or the back end, right? I mean, we spent years at the management clinic talking about extending the season. Right. And people put in big water garden sections and tried to look at different crops. And, they actually had the greenhouse growers sort of move into, different product areas in 6-inch and 8-inch versions of annuals, thinking that things were going to move through. What that has shown us is that when we really look at the tried and true time that people buy garden plants, it's 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. That has not changed. So I think that we can't change Mother Nature, but I think what we can do is we can figure out what other retailers, be it Amazon, be it Instacart, be it Uber, people who have sort of connected into the way that people do convenience shopping. So while we've sort of still relied on sort of that one dimensional, right, in the spring, 2.5 times. Right. That number has been the same since forever. So I think it's the number of journeys and that by extension will flow over into, the growers. But there was an interesting statistic that came out in the spring of 2024 where there were a greater number of first time gardeners who were going into garden centers and they didn't self-identify as a first time gardener. What they self-identified as was a first-time landscape services purchaser. So they were trying to figure out, with the help of folks at the garden center, how do I buy landscape services? How can I look? How can I make sure that people are quality? What are the things that I need to look for? What are the tips and tricks? So I think that people are looking for gardening. But the other thing I think that we need to understand, and it is crazy, we're doing this in September, and when we think about the remembrance that we just had, for 9/11.
Yeah.
And if we look, 30% of the entire U.S. population right now wasn't born on 9/11.
Wow. Right. No, that's very, very true. We are seeing a huge demographic shift, especially in who's buying our product.
And the way they buy it, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for the
Yeah.
longest time, we said everything, was cash and carry. Everything was, we bring it in the back, the consumer takes it out the front.
Yeah.
That's the way everything was sort of organized. But I think that now's the time to look at the business format. Now is the time to sort of say, if we were constructing this over again, what would we do? And we sort of reverse engineer the idea that we have a product that people want to buy 2.5 times a year versus if we were re-engineering the consumer experience, right? What would the offering be in January and February? And how do we satisfy that need for that offering? So I think it's a wonderful time, and it's sort of an open playing field in being able to look at these tools and decide how we implement.
I like that. And that really is a great way to think about it, because we can't keep doing business the same way. And if you look around just in society, whether that's consumer habits or just anything else that we do, things are changing and changing quickly. And there's no reason why our industry shouldn't be taking that same approach. So let's talk a little bit about some potential solutions, because they're a lot more fun than the challenges, because I think that, like we just said, the opportunities are out there. It's almost limitless. But let's talk about specifically artificial intelligence. And the more I think about this term, the more I think that if you asked 100 different people to define AI, you'd get 100 different answers. It's integrated into most of the things that we do, whether we know it or not. So I guess first off, how do you define it from a high level? How should our industry look at AI? When you think about AI, you think, oh, well, I can go to ChatGPT and ask for, a recommendation of a new Netflix series to watch while I'm on my couch. And I don't think that's what we're talking about. So give me a definition that we can work with, and how we should start thinking about AI.
So I'll tell you, I think one of the first things that everybody needs to understand, and this goes back to the evolution of the business model, artificial intelligence is not going to work if we try to adapt it to a system or a process or a situation that is either already broken or it's outdated. So this is the perfect time for us to go in and say, okay, and one of the things that I look at right now, and so for the purposes of this discussion today, I'm actually going to focus on two very specific places at the garden center.
Okay.
It's the front door of the garden center, and then it is the overhead door at the warehouse, right? So if people can just look at that physical space at the front door. So what needs to change about the way that we can help with customer service? And, I was talking to Gavin Herbert from Rogers Gardens, and he was telling me about, his grandfather, who's 92 years old. He's founder of the company. And so he loves coming into the garden center every single day, right?
Sure.
And so one of the places that he likes to be is at the exit. And every person who goes out, he looks at their cart, and he says, oh my gosh, there were beautiful plants out there. Why don't you have them?
Uh-huh.
Right? So he is the old school way of customer feedback. Yeah. And if we think about anything that has been going on, anything that we bought on Amazon, TikTok, Instacart, Whole Foods, anything, we are so used to customer feedback, right? Travelocity, in any of these things. So I think that a garden center or a landscape contractor or a grower, right? One of the things that helps improve the business process is immediate customer feedback. And that can be customer feedback as it relates to products that go out of the garden center. That can be the interface with when someone leaves a landscape job. That could also be for a grower who wants feedback on the way the delivery system worked. People want immediate feedback. And I think this gives us an opportunity to sort of sit with our staff to sort of say, if we were doing this over again, how would we do this? How would we handle the phone? How would we handle customer flow? How would we handle the way that we receive product? And once you have that, then we begin to go in and say, okay, now that I know that this process needs to be revised, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, whomever you're going to go with, right? It's like, tell me how other people are doing customer feedback. And to actually do that the very best, what all do I need? And it's going to give a laundry list. And then you just sort of go through and say, okay, well, that's going to mean that I need to upgrade my POS system. Because really, what we want to do for an most immediate feedback is we want an immediate customer survey. As soon as people leave checkout, did you find everything you needed? Right? So it's that immediacy. But as a group, management and staff have to get together to decide what is the one part of the business and the system that they want to reform.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. It could be as easy as star ratings. It could be as easy as a text, right? You know, by the time you get to your car after you've unloaded your stuff into the trunk, we are very conditioned to that. And the easier, the better. And maybe we don't provide an answer for every single interaction or buying experience that we have, but it's not uncommon for me, at least, just in my day-to-day life, to leave 3 or 4 reviews a week. And I'm not typing out reviews. They're usually star ratings. It's it's a good or bad experience that you're reacting to, I think.
But in Bill, you're exactly right. So think about the number of times that you've used OpenTable to go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason that people see you and their eyes light up is because that software and the AI inside, OpenTable has actually told these people, Bill Calkins is a great guy. He's a wonderful customer. He's always gracious. He says great things about people. He's a big tipper. Be good to this guy. So that's why these things help. But staff and management and owners have to make sure that it's a priority, that they want to evolve that particular part of the business and they believe that it needs to be done differently. Another example that, I was using and getting back to sort of the overhead door, right, at receiving. If we look at the number of people who get a shipment in from a vendor, right, and it's a miscount that's in there, or there's something that's a mismatch between what's physically there in the paperwork versus the PO that the buyer has given the receiving folks. We just did a little thing, and between the warehouse at a garden center, back through the system, to the manufacturer, and then back with a resolution, that's almost 12 touch points. 12 touch points. And if people are actually utilizing sort of good management, it says that paperwork has to be reconciled so that we know what's going into inventory before it goes on the floor. So when we think about any busy Saturday inside our 12-week period where we have to be selling every single day, for every day that the inventory is tied up in the warehouse, right? It's just it's money not doing anybody any good.
Right. You're losing sales. You're losing sales opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting to think about. And to me, the ability to impact that part of the business is seems more straightforward than the customer feedback, customer service side, because the customer service side requires a mindset from management and from your entire team, because you have to want to get that feedback, and then you have to have a plan in place to put it into action, because it doesn't, you can collect the feedback all day, but if it doesn't drive change, it's sort of useless. Whereas on the receiving side, or the rationalization of your paperwork, that seems to be much more tangible in my mind. But they're both, I think, really critical pieces of the puzzle.
However, we could take a sliver, right, on the customer service or on that survey part, right? And what we can ask people is, Did you find everything you needed?
Yeah. It's
It
very
can be
simple.
one thing that information through AI or an automation or an agent can go directly back to the grower. It can bypass marketing. It can bypass everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get right back in the queue to make sure that the assortment's being maximized.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. And that, I think, understanding that big picture with a couple tangible examples will allow us to dig a little bit deeper, because in your article, you identified some very specific tasks, and they tended to be repetitive tasks, kind of like you just gave that example of the
Yeah.
12 different touch points for a very simple process that I think most of our listeners are going through every day. And you did break it down by retailer, grower, and landscaper, although they might have a lot of crossover. But these tasks that might be simplified by AI, and we don't need to go one by one. And like I said, I'll put the link to the article in the show notes. But can you share some of your top ideas with the listeners and maybe focus on some of the ones that you've seen in action or had conversations with owners and managers about, and I guess just as importantly, how they were implemented?
So I think the one thing that in to look at that, or this is the other thing. It is crazy because some of the things that we talked about in July,
might be
they've already been
obsolete
solved for,
Yeah.
right? Or they're already out of fashion,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that the nature here is less about those sort of specific examples,
Okay.
right? And more like, what is a routine task that, and let's just take inventory as an example.
Okay.
On any of these sort of things. The thing that we actually have to have most in the 12 weeks that we have a cash and carry business for the season to maximize sales is the product mix has to be right. And the place for retail, right? There are a couple of different soft hours, right? So you can actually have sort of an inventory gap, right? Midday on Friday.
Okay, yeah.
In the height of the spring. You can have an inventory gap early afternoon on Saturday. You can have an inventory gap in the morning on Sunday. And then you can have an inventory gap on Sunday and Monday, right? So if we look at where those inventory gaps are, what do we have to do to sort of like make sure that there aren't gaps? Right? It's automating or letting systems talk to one another. Mm-hmm. It's automating and letting our growers know. So, one sort of example in looking at automation is to sort of set up and they've done it with ERP systems in the past where there's a minimum order, right? And you always want to stay at that number.
Right.
But the thing that sort of can help with the repetitive task of a buyer contacting the supplier on a regular basis, mm-hmm. when you're at those heights of the week, right? Those four main parts of the 12 weeks, if you will. All annuals are going to sell, mm-hmm. right? Because people want a size 4.5s, right? So if you're constantly having 1,000 4.5 in the assortment that's the best with color, those sort of things. Yeah. We can actually sort of like make that process smoother. Now, on the grower side, this is where they're able to sort of take real-time feedback, right? Because systems talk to one another and they can be in there. Mm-hmm. So that's that. But, the other thing that, and Mark Bradley is doing this with Landscaper and what they're working with their AI, with landscape customers, is because the jobs are sort of done and they're signed off in an AI environment. Okay. All the people who are working on the jobs are associated with that job through an app with their email. So where HR used to have to sort of be involved, are people checking in? Where's the time clock? What did this go? Or that question, why is the landscape crew checking in at a certain time, but they're not actually at the job site until a certain time, right? Well, they've done this so that they're utilizing, GEO and just regular sort of locator information. Yeah. And, when the person arrives with their phone on the job, that's when the time starts ticking. So I think that all of these things are out there, but the specifics of what these tasks are going to be is it's the things that people are identifying that are pain points that result in lost sales. And this is the other thing that I think people need to think about. We can talk about automation for convenience. And one of the things that, I listened to a lot of the podcast from Y Combinator, which is an accelerator that's out in Silicon Valley. And the guy who's managing that particular accelerator is named Gary Tan. And they've done all of the big companies. So Coinstar was done there, Airbnb, AWS, Elon Musk, PayPal, all of those have been out of that accelerator and have done it. And one of the things that Gary talks about is if we really look at what AI is supposed to do, it is the essence of abundance. That's what we really have to strive for. If we're sort of like peeling all the parts back, it's the essence of abundance. And abundance can come in two halves. So it's an abundance by either saving time or making money.
Okay.
Right? So when we look at sort of that example of how are we reconciling sort of those 8 touch points for that, that's a time saving. Mm-hmm. Right? But then we also have to look at the other half of that it is making money because it's getting to the floor quicker.
Yeah.
Right? So it has to be one of these things. Are we saving time? Is it making money? And if we're able to sort of like put all of these different things in a process, then we ask, help us figure this out. Right? We're spending too much time on this, or we're spending too much time on that. So that's where I think people have to sort of like understand, but it's not going to change a broken system. We can't just automate inefficiency and expect it to become efficient. The only thing the AI is going to do there is make it more inefficient, and it's just going to build on the broken system.
So you could go through your organization or your organizational processes and identify where the biggest opportunities lie. And it could be as simple as an old school SWOT analysis where you're looking at your weaknesses, you're looking at opportunities, you're matching those up, and then finding a system that's automated to help, like you said, save time, make more money. And a lot of times those go hand in hand. That makes a lot of sense.
They do. And I'll tell you, one of the things that everybody used to talk about at the management clinic, mm-hmm. right, was a seasonal recap.
Yeah.
Everybody got together, right? And they sat in a room. The owner brought lunch in. Yeah. They talked about everything that went with it. There was a series of recommendations there. And then that laid the plan out for the next season.
Exactly. That became an action plan.
And I think so many times right now that people get so caught up because everything, it's frantic. Mm-hmm. We live in a state of chaos. Our people are in a state of chaos that no one has the time to sort of step back to sort of say, what's not working here? And let's re-engineer it and make it better.
And it's usually not that they don't have the time. It's that they don't make the time. Yeah. I've told this story before, but I had a coworker, this was probably 15 years ago. And we were talking at the end of the year, and he said, the biggest thing I'm disappointed in is that I don't have time to brainstorm anymore. Yeah. And he was in a pretty high, really important position dealing with retailers, and that was his biggest concern. And I think that's only gotten worse in the last decade. You're right. Everything is frantic. Everything's moving quickly. And one of the things, you actually wrote this in your article. It's not whether AI is coming, but rather if our industry is ready to embrace it. And I do think that's something really important that we should discuss, because when I talk to folks around horticulture, I know there's skepticism, but people tend to be watching for opportunities to test out AI, but they often aren't really sure when or where. It's one of those things that's on the to-do list or their mental to-do list, but not quite sure how to start. So when you talk to folks in the green industry, which I know you do, how does the conversation usually go? And where, I guess, at what point during the conversation do you see that light bulb come on, or that tipping point when folks start actually thinking about taking action on it? Because we can talk about these things all day, and it's good that we do. And it might not be a 2026 action plan item for some folks, but it probably could be. So where in that conversation, when you're talking to folks, does that actual action start to take place? Or does it?
So it's interesting because depending on, so I think that there's a difference in the size of the organization.
Okay.
And I think that there is a difference with people who work in the business versus people who work on the business.
Fair.
Right. So as we sort of like look at those things, and I think what most people, and it's one of these things where it goes back to when Amazon first came out, right? And everybody says, "Oh my God, Amazon is the enemy."
Yeah.
Right. Yet all those same people used Amazon for paper products inside the business.
Yep.
Right. So they were against it, but they used it. If we think about everybody who's sort of hearing this right now, they're already using Copilot with Microsoft. They're already using ChatGPT. They're already doing some things. So I think the one thing that people need to coalesce around, right, and sort of looking at sort of where these products are, the conversation has come up that companies really need to have a meeting right now to decide what their policy on AI is going to be. And one of the things, and was talking to somebody, and they're like, "Yes, so we need a policy because we have." So they sell giftware and things online. So the person who's responsible for those cataloging type items, they're actually using very sophisticated prompts, right? So it really gets into the texture, size, weights, measure, style. It's matched with an appropriate aspirational image, right? Everything's there. In the office right next to them is the person who's responsible for creating the signage for the roses, right? And they use the same ChatGPT, but they prompt it themselves, and they're like, "Make me a sign for roses," right? And it looks like a ransom note.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so he's like, we got to figure out how we get together to decide what the prompt is going to be. Because if we think about this diversification of generations who sort of shop online, they're used to a sophisticated product display page. They're used to a 50-word count description. They're used to a star rating, right? They're used to these things. So this is where a lot of people, as we sort of talk through, that now is the time for people to understand how they're going to communicate their brand message by having a series of prompts that everybody uses. And you and I were talking, a little while ago about, on the grower side, in the term or the word ready. What does ready mean?
Yeah.
So I think what people are coalescing around it is that everybody needs a policy. Everybody needs to know that if at a business, as people are in the business, that they're using their version of ChatGPT. Everybody, whether they're internal or external, they're actually using a series of the same prompts. This way, the page for those wonderful and beautiful decor items that people see online and in store, that there's that same elevated and bespoke experience that actually carries over to the roses. It carries over to the camellias. There's an understanding that it's a bit science-y, right? When we're looking at soils, that we actually understand whether we're clay or sand, and that because the product display page that's on our competition, right? they're all using that same sort of language. So
Right.
the branding and that sort of thing has to go over. But the one thing that everyone's in agreement on right now, there's not one person who has said that this is not important.
Mm.
Not one person has said this is not important. Everybody believes it's important. And I think where some people are struggling right now is they think that they can use it as an isolated case.
Right.
And so you can't just use AI in finance, right? It has to, there's a thread that has to run through these things that are sort of making these. But again, it goes back to sort of business practice and where people want to do things. But one of the things, and it is crazy, and I sent you over before, but like with retail, and that example that I sent, and I think, Bill, we're going to put this in the show notes for people.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
If we look at a regular $2 million garden center, anywhere that's year round, they have about 8 different published hours of operation. Right?
Yep. Right.
It's dead winter, right? It's Monday through Friday, and there's staff that's there from 10 to 4. Right? And then you add a couple of hours onto the 5 days, and then you add Saturday, and then you add Sunday, and then you expand the hours. And once we get, into June, you begin to decrease the hours for all 7 days. And then we begin to close Sunday up, right? So the one thing that happens with all of our customers are awake or are around all the time. Yeah. But how do we actually use AI to begin to sort of standardize or make that experience more useful? Whether that is AI helping to direct questions on a phone. Right? Redirecting people. So hours of operation. So when we think about the front of the store, the front door, and when we think about our hours of operation, what can AI do to help rebalance the way that we provide customer service, customer information? If we were just able to, at the height of spring, remember those people who came in saying they needed help with landscape? Yeah. Most of the time, the people at the garden center are like, oh my gosh, those people at landscape never answer this phone. Right? And they know that. So what if we had an automated or an assisted sort of system that says, are you looking for landscape? Go right here. So it's these sort of practical sort of things that people need to look at.
And it makes sense that there isn't a question of, is this, something that's relevant to my business? It's how can I use it? And the prompts thing that you brought up was we talked about that in July at Cultivate, and I've been fascinated by it ever since. And I've changed the way I use AI and you're right, though. It can't be done on an individual case by case basis. It has to be weaved into how you go about your day-to-day job and cross departmentally. I think that's really good advice. And we could probably do a individual podcast just on the prompts alone. But you can also ask AI to help you with the prompts that you're using, which is another sort of weird thing to think about, but it works really, really well. And the more information you put in, the more customized or tailor-made results you're going to get back.
Exactly.
Speaking of how quickly things have changed since we talked in July, I feel like from society, just on a society level, there's new uses for AI emerging every single day on just the platforms that I use on a daily basis. They're coming kind of at light speed. How the heck can people keep up if what we talked about a few months ago is already sort of become status quo and now there's a next thing? I mean, I don't know if you have an answer for that, but how do folks keep up? Like, what are some ways to stay on top of this?
So I think the one thing that people have to do is they can't feel overwhelmed because they're getting sort of a tsunami effect. Yeah. Right? Get out of that mindset. go back to your original AIs here, right? All of this introduction, all of this movement forward and that sort of stuff. The only thing that that's going to do is when you decide how you're going to reform the steps to get customer feedback immediately after they leave that register, that's going to give feedback for assortment with your goal in mind of assortment maximization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to the, so if you're just looking at that, focus on that.
Okay.
Right. And just weave it through, right? How can I use this for this? There's no one solution for everything. But the one thing that I will say where I think people can go wrong is, and I've seen this a lot in the last month, where people are doing one thing on ChatGPT, and then they're going back and they're asking Gemini to evaluate what was done, and then they're testing it with Perplexity.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that happens when you're sort of moving between systems like that, so you have to like figure out what's the one thing you're going to use, and then you kind of like stick with that part of your LLM. There are different types of hallucinations that can sort of move from one LLM to the next, and an example of that might be if you're asking it something about, I want to figure out how I can save $10,000 by doing this particular step.
Okay.
And then it gives you an answer that says you will save $10,000. But you may have put in 10K, right? So $, 10K.
Yeah.
And then it gives that back to you in that. And then when you put it in the next test, right, for the next one, it may actually interpret that not with a $, but it may actually give you a unit of measure that could be 10,000 miles, right? Or 10,000 units, right? So people have to be careful of trying to figure out how they're using too many different things. So once people are deciding what is the business case that they're solving for, then they need to go out and they need to figure out which product best solves for that.
Yeah.
And then once they have it, they stick to it. And that's the answer, because once you have all the information in there in your standard prompts and things like that, then it'll remember all of that. But you just gum up the system by moving things around too much.
I think that's really good advice, and that tsunami effect is real. But, as you said earlier, if you focus on saving time, making money, you can probably eliminate a lot of the clutter and a lot of the tsunami that's coming at you, just like anything you do in business. And it's like AI is not the solution. It's a tool. It's a powerful tool, and one that can be integrated into a lot of different aspects of your business. But thinking about it, I guess, is as just an individual thing, and not, and not letting it overwhelm you. And I do like that idea, stick with a platform, and that makes sense. We do get inundated with different platforms, but we do our best work when we're, we pick the couple that work for us, and we stick with them and kind of be relentlessly consistent on that.
Absolutely.
So, okay, I've got to, before we've been going for a while, we could talk about this a lot. I've got to ask about risks. And it's funny, I talked to my youngest daughter, and obviously she's 15 and knows a lot about AI, but she always refers to it as the AI overlord, which is kind of a joke within our house. And I like that term, but I don't think the AI overlord is going to become self-aware and crush humanity, maybe. But what are some of the things we do need to watch out for? Because I know when we talk about AI, some folks think, oh, it's, here to take jobs. And, there's a lot of different perceptions of AI. So what are your thoughts on this, or anything specific to AI in our industry that actually do concern you?
So I think when we go back to sort of that essence of abundance, right? Save time, save money. That's also going to carry over into the way that we look at the business, in the way that we expand the business. And where I think sort of the overlord or where sort of like risk and those sort of things come in, it's when people don't, when people actually try to either make it do too much or there aren't systems that are in place. One of the things very specifically right now is image creation.
Right.
It's still not there.
Right.
Right. And you know, there are all these things with images. So since you know that images are bad, like as a risk,
yeah,
right, just stay away from images.
Okay.
And you know, you don't have to worry about anything like that. The way that we mitigate risk is by making sure that we are constantly checking our work and that we have added an operational context. Right? We know the chores and the responsibilities and the things that need to be done every single day. Mm-hmm. There was a risk very early on where, you know, an AI was making a planting recommendation.
Okay.
Right. So the recommendation that it started doing was it was recommending that you plant it in the nearest toilet. Right? Because it matches circumference, it matches depth, and there's water.
There's water, right.
Right? So the risk is just to have that get published, right? Mm-hmm. And you're not checking your work because somehow you think that it's smarter than you, right? But that gets sort of like taken care of, you know, over time.
Right.
So I think that there are risks, there are societal things that are out there, but if we're looking at creating a better business, if we're looking at the ways that we can become more responsible, you know, to our community, the way that we can make a better plant recommendation to sort of heal our local ecology so that we can make recommendations back up through our supply chain. We want to be different because we want to do these things because it's going to heal. It's going to help. Right. So we have an opportunity to do a lot of things, but there's risk in everything.
No, that's true. Yeah. We won't dig into potential societal risks on this episode. Maybe we can take that offline. Thinking about the article series and you wrote part one, kicked it off in the September issue of Green Profit, but that first part's just the beginning, and we're planning podcasts to go along with subsequent articles. What should the listeners look forward to in the near future? What are some of the topics you're gonna start digging into?
So one of the big topics, which is going to come up next, is procurement.
Okay.
I mean, if you really think about procurement, if you think about inventory and product, that's the lifeblood of every single thing we do.
Yeah.
We're recognized for sort of our product. So speed to table, sort of getting things out there. We're going to have some great conversations on marketing and the way that large folks use it, the information that's going to be coming from some great global brands that are really going to talk about search and discovery. You know, when we look at sort of global marketing and how local businesses are actually found, there are four particular parts to that. It's search and discovery, and then personalization and recommendation. Okay. So, you know, that's going to sort of be out there. We're going to talk about day-to-day operations, right? And actually have some garden centers who are utilizing it. The other part that it is going to sort of help people understand here is the real role that hyper-local content makes to be discovered. Right. And then the role that our employees play. And, you know, it's interesting sort of like how you go from point A to point B and realize that there's a detour that is either at A+ or B-. Right. An example of this is for search and discovery. One of the ways that we can monetize our employees is actually changing the job titles.
Okay.
That people have. So it's no longer an answer in AI just to be a nursery manager, right? The real answer that we want to be for our local public is we want to be the plant expert in trees, shrubs, perennials, and grasses for zip code 21345. And we have hours of operation here and there. So I think one of the other things that this is going to help is it's going to help local businesses in any of the disciplines understand how much more training that people need, understand the real value and benefit of certification, and really understanding the way that these other educational things can not only increase, the benefit to our employees, but it actually helps us be found all around. This is going to be an exciting series. And Bill, I'll tell you, I cannot be happier that, I'm doing this with you and Jen. And, we're going to have a great content for people and get more people on this podcast.
I love it. And the hyper-local approach is really what sets, independent garden centers apart. And I think historically, we've hung our hats on being that local source, but maybe not been able to tell that story well. And that idea of just changing a title is simple, but very outside the box. I'm really looking forward to the series. I know I get to see them a little bit early. I'm also looking forward to talking to you. And I knew that this would be an awesome conversation. Most of our conversations are over the years. Yeah. But before we close, I always have to ask, is there anything we missed or any final thoughts you want to share? Any great words of Clint wisdom to drop on the listeners before we close it up today?
Well, the only thing I'll say is our product in our category, it played a very important role in the pandemic where people came to horticulture and our products to heal themselves and to heal their families. And people still look at that. We play an important part in communities all across the country. Right. And there's no reason to go back on that. We just need to continue to go forward, and we need to find ways to sort of integrate innovation into the daily process. But we are as important as ever, and plants are a good thing.
Wow. I couldn't have said it any better. I love it. I always say we're absolutely blessed to be in this industry. Yeah. And I really, truly believe it. Clint, thank you so much for your time and everything you do for our industry. I consider you a legend because you always push folks to think ahead and think forward and not rest on your laurels. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Clint.
Bill, thank you very much.
And with that, on behalf of Clint Albin, I'm Bill Calkins with Tech on Demand, wishing you a fantastic fall season if you're listening in real time, spring season of 2026. Take care out there.